Remember when Friday nights meant suspenders and a snorting laugh crashing through the Winslows' front door? Steve Urkel and the Winslow family defined the TGIF era. But the real story is messier. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts you never knew about Family Matters. Number 15. Here is something most fans never think about. The show that gave the world Steve Urkel was never actually built around him. Family Matters was a spin-off of Perfect Strangers, and its entire premise was designed around one character, Harriette Winslow, the sharp, wisecracking elevator operator at the Chicago Chronicle. Producers Thomas L. Miller and Robert L. Boyette loved what Jo Marie Payton brought to Harriette during her recurring appearances on Perfect Strangers. Beginning in Season 3, she was funny, grounded, and had the kind of natural authority that could anchor a family drama. So they built a whole new show around her household. Reginald VelJohnson's Carl had actually appeared on Perfect Strangers 2 in the episode Crime Busters, playing Harriette's police officer husband. The couple already had chemistry before a single frame of Family Matters was ever shot. Think about that. The show was conceived as a portrait of a working-class black family in Chicago, led by a woman who ran an elevator. That was the pitch. That was the vision. Not robots. Not transformation chambers. Not a lovable nerd with a nasally catchphrase. Just a real family and the woman at the center of it. The fact that Harriette was eventually pushed to the margins of her own show makes that origin story all the more striking. But before any of that happened, the character who would change everything needed a name, and that name came with some unexpected consequences. Number 14. Urkel is one of the most recognizable character names in television history, but the name was not invented from scratch. Co-creator Michael Warren named the character after a real person, a writer and director he knew named Steve Urkel. And once the character exploded into a pop culture phenomenon, the real Urkel found himself living inside someone else's fame. According to interviews with Warren, the real Urkel reportedly endured a flood of prank calls from people pretending to be Laura asking for Steve. Warren later acknowledged that naming a nationally famous character after a real acquaintance carried consequences he had not fully anticipated. It started as a casual, creative decision, the kind that feels harmless when you are writing a guest spot for a minor character. It became a lot more complicated when that character became the face of an entire network. Co-creator William Bickley and Warren had built Urkel as a one-dimensional gag at that point. He was the nerdy neighbor from the block. The name was almost an inside joke between collaborators. Nobody in that writer's room was thinking about merchandising, catchphrases, or spin-off dolls. And yet, here we are. The name stuck, the character stuck, and the real Steve Urkel spent years tied to a fictional version of himself that the entire country knew by heart. Now, the kid who actually brought that name to life had his own unlikely origin story. Number 13. Jaleel White was 12 years old when he was cast as Steve Urkel. That fact alone is remarkable. But the story of how he landed the role and what he showed up wearing is something else entirely. White had already been making the rounds in Hollywood for years, auditioning relentlessly as a child actor. He had even been cast in the role that would eventually go to Keshia Knight Pulliam on The Cosby Show, Rudy Huxtable. The role was rewritten as a girl, and White lost it before he ever appeared on screen. By the time Family Matters came along, he described himself as feeling like his window in the business was closing. When he auditioned for the nerdy neighbor role, the character required a specific look, oversized glasses associated with classic screen geeks. White could not find the right pair, so his father, a practicing dentist, handed him the protective eyewear he used during dental procedures. White walked into the room wearing his dad's dental glasses. The producers loved them immediately. The look became part of the character's permanent silhouette. Think about what that means. One of the most iconic visual signatures in 1990s television came from a dentist's supply cabinet. A creative costume decision was made by accident in a waiting room by a kid who thought he might be done with Hollywood. And the role itself was only supposed to last a single episode. Number 12. Steve Urkel was written for exactly one episode. The plan was simple. Bring in a funny neighbor for the episode Laura's First Date in Season 1, get some laughs, and move on. Nobody at Warner Bros. Television or ABC had any intention of making him a recurring character. Here's where things get interesting. When Jaleel White taped that episode, the studio audience reaction was extraordinary. Producer William Bickley later recalled, "You knew he was a success the moment he said his first line. I've never seen a character have such instantaneous success." Reports from that taping describe audience members chanting Urkel between scenes. That kind of feedback did not happen for guest spots on family sitcoms. The producers acted fast. Scripts that had already been written, and in some cases already filmed, were reworked to include Steve. Opening sequences were retrofitted. According to production records, completed Season 1 episodes received brand new teaser scenes showing Urkel pushing on the Winslows' front door while the family braces it shut from the inside. A new scene was even added to Episode 4, Rachel's First Date, so Steve would appear earlier in syndication reruns. Let that sink in. The character was edited into a show that had not planned for him. Those door-push gags you watched 100 times were filmed after the fact, stitched into episodes already in the can. A one-episode guest became the entire show before the first season even finished airing. Number 11. Carl Winslow is the emotional backbone of Family Matters. Patient, exasperated, and warm, Reginald VelJohnson played him with an effortless decency that made him one of the most likable TV dads of his generation. But Carl only exists on that show because of a cop movie. In 1988, producer Thomas L. Miller attended an early industry screening of Die Hard. VelJohnson played Sergeant Al Powell in that film, the desk officer who keeps John McClane alive through the night with his steady voice and humanity. The role was not originally VelJohnson's. Gene Hackman had been in consideration, and Wesley Snipes also reportedly auditioned. VelJohnson landed it after a process that could easily have gone in several other directions. Miller watched that screening and immediately knew he had found his Carl. VelJohnson later recalled that Miller asked me to be in it before the movie was even out. Die Hard had not yet been released to the public. Miller was not casting based on box office or fame. He was casting based on what he saw in a screening room, a big, warm, trustworthy presence that audiences would believe in. The same steady energy that talked a cop through a terrifying night in Nakatomi Plaza became the energy that presided over the Winslow kitchen table for 9 seasons. Carl's decency, his soft frustration with Urkel, all of it traces back to one producer watching an early cut of an action movie and seeing a father figure on screen. All right, we're at the halfway mark, and things are about to get even wilder. Before we hit the top 7, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Family Matters quote or moment? Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel grow. Number 10. By Season 3, something had shifted. Episodes that began as Winslow family stories were being restructured around Urkel. The ensemble that had anchored the show for 2 seasons was slowly being pushed to the edges of its own narrative. And according to producer William Bickley, that shift was not coming from inside the writer's room. It was coming from the network. Bickley was direct about it in interviews. The pressure to feature more Urkel was coming from ABC and from the business side of the production. The character had become a marketing machine. Urkel dolls, Urkel games, Urkel cereal. The image was everywhere. And where there is merchandise to protect, creative decisions tend to follow the money. To keep Jaleel White on the show, the studio increased his salary significantly, reportedly out of concern that his range and leading man looks might attract offers from other productions. Both Bickley and Robert Boyett publicly defended White in interviews, insisting that the Urkel-centric drift was a network and corporate directive, not an actor demanding more screen time. That distinction matters. It is easy to look back at the later seasons and assume the character's dominance was ego-driven. The producers say otherwise. What happened to Family Matters was a boardroom calculation. Protect the brand, feature the brand, let the brand drive the show. The original family drama did not fade because of creative fatigue. It was redirected, and that redirection produced something nobody could have predicted. Number 9. If you watched Family Matters into the mid-1990s, you watched Steve Urkel shrink himself, travel through time, fight an evil ventriloquist dummy, and get cloned in his own basement. None of that was in the original vision for the show. All of it grew from the same root cause, a network that needed to keep its biggest character interesting while the family receded. The Urkelbot, the transformation chamber, the DNA cologne that turned Steve into suave alter ego Stefan Urquelle, these science fiction gimmicks escalated season after season. One Halloween episode titled Stevil required an entire dedicated shooting day plus significant post-production puppetry work to bring a murderous Urkel ventriloquist dummy to life. That complexity was unusual for a multi-camera sitcom on a standard weekly schedule. Director Richard Correll helmed that episode, and the sheer logistical weight of it reflects how far the show had traveled from its original premise. A family comedy built around a Chicago elevator operator had become a vehicle for elaborate physical set pieces. The wild inventions were not whimsy. They were the symptom of a show overbuilt around one character with nowhere left to grow except sideways into science fiction. Jordan Peele and Keegan-Michael Key later skewered this in a sketch where Peele played an increasingly defeated Reginald VelJohnson watching his show get consumed by its guest star. The parody landed because the observation was accurate, and one of those inventions actually came about to protect Jaleel White's voice. Number 8. Playing Steve Urkel required specific physical and vocal commitments. The high-pitched nasal voice, the exaggerated posture, the snort laugh, the physical clumsiness. Jaleel White performed all of it in nearly every episode for years. And by the time producers introduced Stefan Urquelle, the suave, smooth-talking alter ego, one of the quieter reasons for that decision was medical. According to executive producer David W. Duclin, the Urkel voice was genuinely taxing White's vocal cords. Playing a character with normal speech patterns gave him time to physically recover. Stefan was originally conceived as a one-episode gimmick, but fan response was so strong that he kept coming back, and the season 5 finale was reportedly reworked at the last minute specifically to bring Stefan back after audiences made clear they wanted more of him. White himself was initially lukewarm on Stefan. In interviews, he described the character as essentially just himself, a normal teenager with normal speech, which made it feel less like acting and more like simply showing up. There was no comedic persona to hide behind. Stefan was Jaleel without the armor. But what started as vocal rest became a storytelling engine. Stefan gave Laura a reason to question her feelings. It gave the writers a way to show Urkel yearning for something beyond the geek label. And it gave White room to demonstrate real range beyond the character that had consumed nearly a decade of his life. A medical necessity quietly became one of the show's most emotionally interesting threads. Number 7. Did I do that? Is one of the most recognizable catchphrases in American television history. It is on merchandise, in parodies, in cultural shorthand decades after the show ended. And it was not planned. It was chosen by a live studio audience, in real time, through the oldest metric in situation comedy: laughter. Jaleel White discussed the catchphrase's origin on the Pod Meets World podcast. Writers had experimented with different lines for Urkel's post-destruction moment. Early versions had him simply say, "Excuse me." Another attempt borrowed from the Life Alert commercial, "I've fallen and I can't get up." Other contenders reportedly included, "Got any cheese?" Writers cycled through options across tapings using live audience response to determine what actually worked. Did I do that? 1. The combination of the phrasing, White's delivery, the scrunched guilty face, and the nasal pitch produced something that clicked instantly. White credited the live audience model for the discovery. There was no social media, he said. You had that live studio audience to tell you in real time what was working. That process produced one of the decade's defining pop culture artifacts. The phrase that defined Urkel was not written at a desk. It was chosen in a room full of people laughing across multiple tapings until the right combination of words and delivery made the audience react. And while that phrase was being refined, a completely different kind of decision was quietly erasing a member of the Winslow family. Number 6. At the end of season 4, the Winslow family had 3 children, Eddie, Laura, and Judy. When season 5 began, Judy was gone. No farewell episode. No explanation, no mention of where she had gone. The youngest Winslow simply walked upstairs one day and never came back down, and the family carried on as if she had never existed. Jamie Foxworth was 13 years old when she was written out. Co-creator William Bickley later attributed the decision primarily to budget considerations. As more airtime and production resources shifted toward Urkel, something had to give. Judy's storylines had become minimal. Her screen time had shrunk to the point where producers apparently concluded she was an expendable line item, so they cut her without ceremony and without a word of on-screen acknowledgement. Jo Marie Payton did not take it quietly. In interviews, she recalled confronting producers directly. "You took away my baby. When I asked you, 'Why did you take away my baby girl?' you said, 'Nobody would notice.'" Payton has said that Foxworth learned of the decision before some of her castmates did. The lack of any narrative closure was not an oversight. It was a choice. A show literally titled Family Matters deleted a family member to save money, the irony is hard to ignore. And the budget pressure that erased Judy was not the only production compromise that reshaped the original cast. Even before Jamie Foxworth arrived, another actress had already played the role. Number 5. When Family Matters first aired, Judy Winslow was played by Valerie Jones, not Jamie Foxworth. Jones appeared in the pilot episode, The Mama Who Came to Dinner, as the youngest Winslow child. The character was not even named on screen in that episode. And by the time episode 2 aired, the role had been quietly recast. with Foxworth stepping in as the Judy most viewers came to know. The pilot itself was a significantly different version of the show. Director Joel Zwick and creators William Bickley and Michael Warren had built an episode that was meant to include a crossover scene featuring Perfect Strangers characters Balky and Larry, played by Bronson Pinchot and Mark Linn-Baker. That scene was cut before broadcast. The original set design was also overhauled almost immediately. Even the theme song was different, something we will get to shortly. What this adds up to is that the definitive early cast of Family Matters was still being assembled after the show had technically already premiered. Valerie Jones played Judy. The Balky crossover was filmed and removed. The set was redressed. The music was swapped. Audiences watching episode 1 were essentially watching a dress rehearsal for a show still figuring out what it wanted to be. The version of Family Matters that became iconic did not arrive fully formed. It was built in pieces, with pieces being quietly exchanged, including the theme song that most people associate with the show to this day. Number 4. If you grew up watching Family Matters, As Days Go By is probably already playing in your head. The warm melody performed by Jesse Frederick became synonymous with the Winslow household, with Friday nights, with the whole feeling of TGIF-era television. But that song did not open the very first episodes of the show. For the first 5 episodes of Season 1, the opening theme was Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. The Armstrong track set a completely different tone, warmer, jazzier, more nostalgic in a classic American sense. It was pulled after the episode titled Straight A's and replaced with the commissioned theme written by Jesse Frederick, Bennett Salve, and Scott Rome, performed by Frederick. That creative team was not a random hire. Frederick, Salve, and Rome were the same composers behind the Full House theme and the Step-by-Step theme. They built the sonic identity of the Miller-Boyett TGIF lineup. The musical warmth you associate with those Friday night blocks, that slightly optimistic kitchen table feeling in the melody, came from the same group applied across the network's biggest family comedies. In syndicated reruns, the Armstrong original is typically scrubbed out entirely, replaced by the Frederick version. Most viewers who discovered the show in reruns have never heard it open any other way. The song that defines the series was a replacement. The music everyone remembers was Plan B, and behind that comforting theme, the set was anything but harmonious by the end. Number 3. Jo Marie Payton played Harriette Winslow for 8 seasons. She was the show's original anchor, the character the entire series was built around. And she left midway through Season 9, the show's final year, under circumstances that were anything but smooth. The most widely reported account involves a confrontation with Jaleel White during an episode in which White played Steve's cousin Cornelius, a street-tough character very different from Urkel. According to Payton, White attempted to include material she believed violated broadcast standards and practices guidelines, and she refused. The situation escalated. Darius McCrary, who played Eddie Winslow, has said he physically stepped between them to keep the conflict from going further. Payton has given varying accounts over the years. She has at times described genuine hostility and at other times said she simply wanted to pursue other projects, including a jazz album she was developing. What is not in dispute is that she did not complete the final season. She was replaced by actress Judy Elder for the remaining episodes. The cast felt the loss immediately. Reginald VelJohnson compared it to getting a divorce and then marrying somebody else. Darius McCrary said it felt like my mom was gone. Judy Elder stepped into an impossible situation through no fault of her own. The woman the show was built around did not get to finish it. And the show itself was on a different network because of a financial decision that had nothing to do with storytelling. Number 2. Most fans assume Family Matters ended on ABC. It did not. The show's final season aired on CBS, and the reason it moved has nothing to do with creative choices. It has everything to do with a reported figure of nearly $40 million and a corporate tug-of-war between 2 broadcast networks. By 1996, ABC had been acquired by Disney. Producers Thomas L. Miller and Robert L. Boyett grew concerned about their long-term position within the new structure. They feared becoming a secondary priority in a Disney-controlled environment. When CBS came with an offer to bring Family Matters and Step by Step to their network for Season 9, Miller and Boyett accepted. The numbers were staggering. According to the Deseret News, ABC executives described CBS as paying nearly $40 million for 22 episodes, roughly 20% more than ABC had been paying per season. CBS's position was that acquiring 2 proven Friday night shows in one move was worth the premium. It backfired. Family Matters lost its TGIF identity the moment it moved. CBS placed it in a weaker time slot without the surrounding lineup that had made those Friday nights appointment viewing. Ratings dropped. CBS canceled the show after one season. The finale aired in the summer of 1998 without the ceremony a 9-season run deserved. The show that defined Friday nights for millions ended on the wrong night, on the wrong network, after a deal that put dollars ahead of the audience that had made it matter. Number 1. Michelle Thomas joined Family Matters in 1993 as Myra Monkhouse, Steve Urkel's devoted and endlessly patient girlfriend. She was warm, funny, and possessed a comic timing that made her feel like a natural extension of the show's best energy. But Thomas had already made her mark before Myra ever existed. She played Justine Phillips on The Cosby Show, Theo Huxtable's girlfriend, in a recurring role that demonstrated the same magnetic presence she would bring to Family Matters. Off-screen, Thomas had a long personal relationship with Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Theo. Their real-life connection gave her performance an additional layer of authenticity that viewers responded to without quite knowing why. In August 1997, Thomas was diagnosed with an intra-abdominal desmoplastic small round cell tumor, an extremely rare and aggressive cancer. Her illness limited her appearances during the show's final season on CBS. She completed what she could, but the disease progressed quickly. Michelle Thomas died in late December 1998, shortly after the series wrapped. She was 30 years old. Malcolm Jamal Warner was among those at her side. Jaleel White has spoken about her with evident grief, keeping a memorial to her in his home, and referring to her as my bubbly Myra Monkhouse in public tributes. Every Myra and Steve scene carries that weight now. The lightest corner of a complicated show holds one of its most quietly devastating real-life stories. A talent that big, gone that young, at the very end of the run she helped define. Family Matters ran for 9 seasons and survived network pressure, budget cuts, cast changes, and a cross-network move that costed the audience it had spent a decade building. The show that started as a portrait of a working-class Chicago family became something messier and more interesting than anyone planned. An accidental guest star rewrote its identity. A pair of dental glasses became an iconic silhouette. A network paid nearly $40 million to transplant it, then canceled it a year later. Behind the laugh track, real people navigated real conflict, real grief, and real compromise. None of it was guaranteed. If this video surprised you, drop your favorite fact in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves the show as much as you do. And as always, did I do that? We'll see you next time.